In the dimly lit library of a sprawling mansion, Ryan Calloway, the 25-year-old heir to a multi-billion-dollar fortune, found himself staring at an old, faded photograph tucked between the pages of an antique book. The faces in the photo were unfamiliar, two children standing outside a modest home, their clothes worn but their smiles radiant. But what caught Ryan's attention was the handwritten note on the back. "To my dearest friend, thank you for everything. This wouldn't have been possible without you. J.H." Who were these children? And why did this cryptic message feel like the key to a long-buried family secret? Ryan Calloway had grown up surrounded by luxury. The Calloway estate was more than a home. It was a symbol of the family's wealth and power. The mansion sprawled across 30 hectares of manicured lawns, its walls adorned with priceless art, its halls echoing with the whispers of history. But for Ryan, the grandeur often felt hollow. Despite his privileged upbringing, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Ryan was the youngest son of Maxwell Calloway, a self-made billionaire who had built an empire in real estate and technology. Maxwell was a towering figure, both physically and in reputation, known for his sharp business acumen and unyielding determination. His mother, Evelyn, was a former model-turned-philanthropist, whose polished demeanor often masked the strain of living under Maxwell's shadow. Ryan's older siblings, Carter and Sophia, had seamlessly stepped into their roles within the family empire, leaving Ryan to drift in their wake. Unlike his siblings, Ryan wasn't interested in board meetings or stock portfolios. He preferred the quiet corners of the mansion, the library in particular, where he could lose himself in books about art, history, and philosophy. His dream was to pursue a career in photography, a passion his father dismissed as a hobby unworthy of the Calloway name. The library was Ryan's sanctuary, a labyrinth of towering shelves filled with rare first editions and dusty tomes. It was here, late one stormy evening, that Ryan stumbled upon the photograph. He had been flipping through an old leather-bound book on architecture when the photo slipped out and landed on the Persian rug. Its edges were frayed, its colors faded, but the faces of the two children seemed to leap out at him, full of life and emotion. Ryan's curiosity was piqued. Who were these children? Why was their photograph hidden in this book? And who was J.H., the mysterious figure mentioned in the note? The questions gnawed at him, sparking a determination he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long while, Ryan felt like he had a purpose. But as he began to dig into the mystery, he couldn't shake the feeling that the photograph was more than just an old keepsake. It was a thread leading to something much bigger, something that could unravel the carefully curated image of the Calloway family. The weight of that realization hung heavy in the air, even as the storm outside raged on. Rising action, 2,500 words. The day Ethan Kensington discovered the photograph began like any other. At 27, he lived in a sprawling estate outside San Francisco, surrounded by the trappings of unimaginable wealth. As the sole heir to the Kensington fortune, his days were a mix of meetings about family investments, parties with social elites, and the occasional philanthropic event orchestrated by his mother, Claire Kensington. To the outside world, Ethan's life was perfect, but he carried the heavy weight of his father's expectations and the unspoken tensions that seemed to haunt the family. It started in the library, a cavernous room lined with books that Ethan doubted anyone had read in decades. He had gone there to escape a particularly heated discussion with his father, Richard Kensington, about the future of their family's business empire. Richard had dismissed Ethan's idea of funding renewable energy projects, calling it a childish whim. Feeling defeated, Ethan wandered aimlessly until his foot struck something hard beneath the edge of an antique desk. Curious, Ethan crouched down and pulled out an old, dusty box. Inside, he found stacks of documents, faded letters, and a worn photograph. The image was black and white, showing a young man and woman standing outside a modest home. What caught Ethan's attention was the man. He looked eerily like his father, but much younger, and without the polished corporate demeanor Ethan knew. Scribbled on the back of the photograph were the words, "William and Anna, 1975. Ethan's heart raced. His father's name was Richard, not William. And who was Anna? The discovery unsettled him deeply, stirring questions he had never thought to ask. Unable to shake the feeling that this photograph held a secret, Ethan decided to investigate. He began by asking Claire about it over breakfast the next morning. She froze mid-sip of her coffee when Ethan slid the photograph across the table. Her usual poise cracked, and for a moment she seemed genuinely afraid. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice tight. "In the library," Ethan replied, watching her reaction carefully. "Who are these people?" Claire hesitated, glancing toward the hallway as if expecting Richard to walk in. "Ethan, sometimes it's better not to dig into the past," she said finally, pushing the photograph back toward him. "Leave it alone." But Ethan couldn't. Claire's evasiveness only fueled his determination. That afternoon, he went to the family archives, a secured room in the mansion that held decades of Kensington history. He scoured old records and journals, searching for any mention of William and Anna. What he found were inconsistencies. Several documents from the 1970s mentioned a William Kensington, but by the 1980s the name vanished, replaced by Richard. It was as if his father had rewritten his own history. Frustrated, Ethan reached out to his grandmother, Eleanor Kensington, who lived in a smaller estate nearby. Eleanor had always been an enigmatic figure, fiercely loyal to the family, but known for her sharp tongue and unfiltered honesty. When Ethan showed her the photograph, she studied it in silence before sighing deeply. "Ethan," she said, her voice heavy with regret, "there's a reason your father never talks about his early life. But if you're going to dig up the past, you need to be prepared for what you'll find." "What does that mean?" Ethan pressed. "Who is William?" Eleanor hesitated before answering. "William Kensington was your father's real name before he became Richard. Anna, she was his first love. They were supposed to have a life together, but something happened, something that changed him forever." Before Ethan could ask more, Eleanor grew visibly agitated. "You need to ask your father, not me," she said, cutting the conversation short. Ethan left his grandmother's house more determined than ever. He confronted Richard later that evening, presenting the photograph and demanding answers. Richard's reaction was explosive. He snatched the photograph out of Ethan's hand and tore it in two before storming out of the room. "Stay out of it, Ethan," he shouted. "You don't know what you're messing with." The outburst only deepened Ethan's resolve. He decided to take a different approach and reached out to an old family friend, James Mercer, who had once been Richard's business partner. James had retired years ago, but he had a reputation for being forthright. When Ethan showed him the torn photograph, James leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of surprise and sorrow. "I wondered when this would come back to haunt him," James said quietly. "Your father, William, he wasn't always the man you know now. When he was younger, he was in love with Anna, and they had plans to build a life together. But his ambitions got in the way. He wanted to escape the small town they grew up in to become someone important. Anna didn't fit into that vision, and when an opportunity came to join your grandfather's company, he took it." Ethan felt a wave of anger and sadness. "So he just left her behind?" "Not exactly," James said, his voice tinged with regret. "Anna was pregnant when he left. Your father knew, but he chose to walk away. He changed his name to Richard to distance himself from that life and built the empire you now stand to inherit." The revelation hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had always looked up to his father, despite their differences, but this betrayal painted him in a completely different light. Worse still, it meant Ethan had a half-sibling out there, someone who had been denied a place in the family for the sake of ambition. Determined to uncover the full truth, Ethan tracked down the town where his father had grown up. It was a small, rural place that seemed frozen in time. After some digging, he found an address for Anna's old house. When he arrived, he was greeted by an older woman who introduced herself as Margaret, Anna's sister. Margaret was wary at first, but when Ethan explained who he was, her demeanor softened. She invited him inside and shared Anna's story. "Anna passed away 5 years ago," Margaret said, her voice heavy with emotion. "She never stopped loving William, even after he left. She raised their son, Michael, on her own. He's a good man, works as a teacher in the next town over." Ethan's heart ached at the thought of Anna's struggles and the life she had built, despite being abandoned. Margaret handed him a photograph of Michael, and Ethan felt an odd sense of recognition. Michael looked so much like their father, yet there was a kindness in his eyes that Richard lacked. Back at the mansion, Ethan wrestled with what to do next. Confronting his father again felt futile, but he couldn't ignore what he had learned. After days of deliberation, he decided to reach out to Michael. Writing the letter was one of the hardest things Ethan had ever done. How do you explain decades of silence and lies? When Ethan finally mailed the letter, he felt a mix of anxiety and hope. He didn't know how Michael would react, if he would even respond, but Ethan knew he had to try. For the first time, he felt a sense of purpose beyond the shadow of his family's legacy. He wasn't just uncovering the truth. He was trying to make amends for the mistakes of the past. Weeks later, Ethan received a reply. The envelope was simple, with Michael's name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a letter filled with cautious curiosity. Michael wanted to meet, but he made it clear that he had no interest in the Kensington fortune. "I just want to understand where I come from," the letter read. The day of their meeting was one Ethan would never forget. As he sat across from Michael in a quiet cafe, he felt an overwhelming sense of connection. They talked for hours, sharing stories and piecing together the fragments of their family's history. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt free, not bound by his father's expectations or the weight of the Kensington name, but free to forge his own path. Their meeting was just the beginning. Ethan and Michael continued to build a relationship, slowly but steadily. Ethan even brought Michael to meet Eleanor, who welcomed him with open arms. Claire too eventually came around, though Richard remained distant, unwilling to confront his past mistakes. Through it all, Ethan learned an invaluable lesson. Family isn't just about blood or legacy. It's about the choices we make and the connections we nurture. The photograph that had once been a source of pain and betrayal had become a symbol of reconciliation and hope. Ethan's journey to uncover the truth had not only shattered the illusion of his family's legacy, but also paved the way for a new one, built on honesty, understanding, and love. Climax. The tension in the Calloway mansion was palpable. Ryan's discovery of Jonathan Hartwell's letters and the fraudulent deed had exposed a truth that threatened to topple the carefully curated legacy of his family. But the most transformative moment was yet to come. A moment that would test Ryan's courage, his principles, and his loyalty to his family. Ryan sat in the grand dining room, waiting for his father. The walls were lined with portraits of Calloway ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to judge him. The air felt heavy, and the ticking of the antique clock only amplified the weight of the moment. Maxwell Calloway finally entered, his presence commanding as always. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had faced countless adversaries and emerged victorious. "What's this about, Ryan?" Maxwell asked, his voice calm but tinged with irritation. Ryan stood, holding the photograph and the letters. "It's about the truth, Dad. About Jonathan Hartwell. About what you did to him." Maxwell's face remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Jonathan Hartwell," he said, leaning back in his chair. "That's a name I haven't heard in years." Ryan placed the photograph on the table. "He was more than just a name. He was your partner, your friend, and you betrayed him." Maxwell glanced at the photograph but didn't pick it up. "I didn't betray him. I made a business decision. He couldn't keep up with the demands of the company. It was either him or the business." Ryan's voice trembled with anger. "You didn't just cut him out. You took everything from him, his home, his career, his dignity, and you call that a business decision?" Maxwell sighed, as if he were tired of explaining himself. "You don't understand, Ryan. You've never had to make the hard choices. Jonathan was talented, yes, but he was holding us back. I did what I had to do to secure our future." Ryan shook his head. "No, you did what you had to do to secure your future. You destroyed a man's life for your own gain, and you've spent decades hiding it." The unexpected visitor. Before Maxwell could respond, there was a knock at the door. Evelyn Calloway entered the room, her face pale. She had overheard the argument and held a bundle of papers in her hands. "I think it's time you heard the full story, Ryan," Evelyn said softly. She placed the papers on the table. They were letters from Jonathan Hartwell to Evelyn, written during the years after Maxwell had betrayed him. The letters revealed a deeper connection between Evelyn and Jonathan, one that Maxwell had long suspected but never acknowledged. Evelyn hesitated, her hands trembling. "Jonathan and I, we were close. He wasn't just your father's partner, he was my friend. And when Maxwell cut him out, I tried to help him. I even begged Maxwell to reconsider, but he wouldn't listen." Ryan was stunned. "You knew about this all along?" Evelyn nodded, tears in her eyes. "I didn't know everything, but I knew enough. I've carried this guilt for years, Ryan. I should have done more." Maxwell's face darkened. "Evelyn, this is not the time." "This is exactly the time, Maxwell," Evelyn interrupted, her voice rising. "You've built this family on lies, and it's time we faced the truth." As the argument unfolded, Emma arrived at the mansion, holding a document she had uncovered during her research. She entered the room hesitantly, sensing the tension. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Emma said, "but I think you need to see this." She handed the document to Ryan. It was Jonathan Hartwell's final will, written shortly before his death. In it, Jonathan had left a portion of his designs and intellectual property to his children, but Maxwell had suppressed the will, ensuring that Jonathan's family received nothing. Ryan's hands shook as he read the document. "You didn't just betray Jonathan, you robbed his family of their future." Maxwell's expression hardened. "You don't understand the pressures I was under, the competition, the stakes." "No, Dad," Ryan said firmly. "You don't understand what it means to do the right thing. You've justified your actions for so long that you've forgotten what integrity looks like." The confrontation reached its peak when Jonathan's daughter, Elizabeth, entered the room. Emma had contacted her during their research, and Elizabeth had agreed to meet Ryan. She was now a middle-aged woman, her face lined with the struggles of a life overshadowed by her father's downfall. Elizabeth's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "I didn't come here to demand anything. I came here because I thought you should know the truth. My father was a good man, and what happened to him broke our family. But we've moved on. We've built our own lives." Ryan turned to his father. "Do you hear that? Even after everything you did, they've found a way to move forward. And here we are, clinging to a legacy built on lies." Maxwell looked at Elizabeth, his expression unreadable. For the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "I never meant for things to go this far. I thought I was doing what was best for my family. Elizabeth nodded. Maybe it's not too late to make things right. Ryan stood, his resolve firm. We need to make this right, Dad, not just for Jonathan and his family, but for ourselves. If we want to have any integrity left, we need to acknowledge the truth. Maxwell looked around the room, at the faces of his family and the woman whose father he had wronged. He seemed to age before their eyes, the weight of his decisions finally catching up with him. After a long silence, Maxwell spoke. You're right. It's time. In the weeks that followed, Ryan worked with Elizabeth and her family to restore what had been taken from them. Maxwell publicly admitted to his actions, releasing a statement that detailed the truth about Jonathan Hartwell's contributions to the Callaway empire. He also established a foundation in Jonathan's name, dedicated to supporting architects and designers from underprivileged backgrounds. The Callaway family legacy was forever changed, but for Ryan, it was a change for the better. He found a renewed sense of purpose, using his passion for photography to document the stories of people like Jonathan, people whose contributions had been overlooked or forgotten. As for Maxwell, he spent his remaining years trying to rebuild the trust he had lost, both with his family and the community. It was a long road, but one he was finally willing to walk. The aftermath of truth. The Callaway mansion was no longer just a symbol of wealth and power. It had become a place of reckoning. In the days following Maxwell Callaway's public confession, the family's once glamorous reputation faced public scrutiny. News outlets picked up the story of the betrayal of Jonathan Hartwell, painting a picture of a dynasty built on deceit. But amidst the media frenzy, something remarkable began to emerge, a story of redemption and transformation. Ryan, now invigorated by his decision to expose the truth, worked tirelessly to ensure that the Hartwell family's legacy was not just restored but celebrated. He collaborated with Elizabeth Hartwell and her siblings to launch the Hartwell Callaway Design Initiative, a non-profit dedicated to empowering young designers and architects from underrepresented communities. The initiative became a symbol of justice, giving new meaning to the Callaway name. Rebuilding relationships. Maxwell, burdened by guilt and the consequences of his actions, took a step back from public life. The once proud patriarch who had commanded every room he entered now spent his days reflecting on the decisions that had shaped and fractured his family. Ryan and Evelyn encouraged him to engage with the Hartwell family, hoping that reconciliation could offer him some measure of peace. One afternoon, Maxwell visited Elizabeth's modest home. It was a far cry from the opulence he was accustomed to, but the warmth of the Hartwell family made it feel richer than any mansion. Elizabeth greeted him at the door, her expression cautious, but not hostile. "Mr. Callaway," she said, her tone measured. "I didn't expect to see you here." Maxwell nodded, his voice quieter than it had ever been. "I owe you an apology, a real one. Not just for what I did to your father, but for everything my actions cost your family." Elizabeth led him to the living room, where photographs of her father lined the shelves. She handed Maxwell a framed picture of Jonathan Hartwell, smiling proudly beside one of his early designs. "This is who you betrayed," she said softly. "A man who believed in collaboration and fairness." Maxwell's hands trembled as he held the photograph. "I've spent my life justifying my choices, convincing myself I did what was necessary. But I was wrong. I took more than just a partnership. I took his future." Elizabeth nodded, her expression softening. It's never too late to do the right thing. The Callaway Foundation's transformation. The Hartwell Callaway Design Initiative quickly gained traction, drawing attention from industry leaders and philanthropists alike. Ryan spearheaded the foundation's projects, pouring his energy into making a tangible difference. He organized scholarships, mentorship programs, and workshops, ensuring that the next generation of designers would have opportunities that Jonathan Hartwell never did. At the Foundation's first gala, Ryan stood before a room filled with supporters, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "This initiative isn't just about honoring my father's former partner," Ryan began, glancing at Elizabeth in the front row. "It's about righting a wrong that should have been addressed decades ago. Jonathan Hartwell's work was extraordinary, but his legacy was nearly erased. We're here to make sure that never happens again, not to him and not to anyone else." The audience erupted in applause, and Ryan felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced. For the first time, he wasn't living in the shadow of his family's wealth. He was forging a path of his own, one that honored truth and justice. A family changed within the Calloway family. The revelations had caused a seismic shift. Evelyn, who had spent years grappling with her own guilt, found solace in her role as a mentor within the Foundation. She worked closely with aspiring designers, sharing stories of her own struggles and encouraging them to persevere. "I used to think that staying silent was the safest choice," Evelyn admitted during a mentorship session. "But silence can be its own betrayal. Speak up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Maxwell, though reluctant to take a leadership role in the Foundation, made a quiet impact by volunteering his time. He visited schools to speak about the importance of integrity in business, using his own mistakes as cautionary tales. His once imposing demeanor had softened, replaced by a humility that resonated with his audiences. "Power without principles is hollow," Maxwell told a group of business students. "It might build empires, but it destroys trust. And without trust, there's nothing." Ryan's personal journey. For Ryan, the journey had been transformative in ways he hadn't anticipated. His decision to confront his father had not only exposed the truth, but had also liberated him from the weight of his family's legacy. He no longer felt bound by expectations or the pressure to conform to the Calloway image. Ryan rekindled his passion for photography, using his talent to document the stories of people like Jonathan Hartwell, unsung heroes whose contributions had been overlooked. His photo series, Forgotten Architects, gained international acclaim, shining a spotlight on the lives and works of those who had shaped communities without recognition. One photograph in particular captured global attention. An image of Jonathan Hartwell's original blueprints, framed alongside the Calloway mansion. The juxtaposition of the two symbols, the work that had been stolen and the empire it had built, told a story more powerful than words. The ripple effect. The Calloway family's transformation had a ripple effect far beyond their immediate circle. The Foundation inspired other wealthy families and corporations to re-examine their own histories, leading to a wave of initiatives aimed at addressing past injustices. The concept of corporate reparations gained traction, with businesses dedicating resources to righting historical wrongs. Elizabeth Hartwell, now a board member of the Foundation, became a prominent advocate for equity in the design industry. Her speeches and writings highlighted the importance of acknowledging the past while building a more inclusive future. "It's not about erasing history," Elizabeth often said. "It's about learning from it and doing better." A moment of closure. Years later, Ryan stood in front of a newly constructed community center in honor of Jonathan Hartwell. The building, designed by a team of young architects mentored through the Foundation, was a testament to what could be achieved when justice and creativity converged. As Ryan cut the ribbon, he felt a deep sense of closure. His family's legacy had been tarnished, but it had also been redeemed. The Calloway name now stood for something more than wealth. It stood for accountability, growth, and the courage to confront the truth. In the crowd, Maxwell and Evelyn watched with pride. Elizabeth stood beside them, her father's photograph clutched in her hands. For a moment, their differences faded, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. The story of the Calloway family and the Hartwells was not just one of betrayal and redemption. It was a reminder that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. It showed that even the most entrenched legacies can change when people choose integrity over self-preservation. For Ryan, the lesson was clear. Doing what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. In standing up to his father, he had found his own voice, a voice that spoke for justice, empathy, and the power of change. As the sun set on the community center's grand opening, Ryan took one last photograph, a candid shot of Maxwell and Elizabeth shaking hands, their smiles genuine. It was a moment that encapsulated everything the journey had been about, bridging divides, healing wounds, and building something meaningful from the ashes of the past. And with that, the story came full circle, leaving behind a legacy not of power, but of progress.